It has been suggested that I read or peruse the book by David M. Buss, The Evolution of Desire, Strategies of Human Mating. So I finally decided to take on this challenge, agnostic style. So we're not going to just give an overview, but we're actually going to, I would say normally I would read through the book, but we're not going to read through the book. We're just going to read through certain sections of where I've marked it up. So this has been a challenge by Obsidian. So I'm going to read through the book to see where we differ in the reading of the book. So just to tell you the methodology, I got two versions. I got this version, but also the audio version. So I've been listening to the audio book, and then after I listen to the audio book, I come back behind it, and I'm actually reading through the book and making my notes. So on this version, you're going to get me not reading through the book, but actually uh, see me actually going through the notes and highlights that I've made. So, without further ado, The Evolution of Desire by David M. Buss. Now, here's the first piece that I've marked up. I think this is in the introduction. He says, pain, betrayal, and the loss contrast sharply with the usual romantic notions of love. We grew up believing in true love and finding our one and only. Um, I do believe, not Roosh, but well, Tomasi calls this one-itis, believing in true love and our one and only. And we assume that once we do, we'll marry in bliss and live happily ever after. That is the modern version of marriage and love, but in reality, it's never been that way. He said even a cursory look at the divorce rate, the 30 to 50% incidence of extramarital affairs, which I believe is higher, but I think he wrote this in 1994, and the jealous rages that rack so many relationships shatters those illusions. You know, all we have to do is look at our parents. See, look, discord and delusion in mating relations were typically seen as signs of failure. They said conflict in mating is the norm and not the exception. It ranges from a man's anger at a woman who declines his advances to a wife's frustration with a husband who fails to listen or help in the home, or about money. These pervasive patterns defy easy explanation. Something deeper and more telling about human nature is involved, something that we do not fully understand. Now, skipping down to first section, our first main section, evolutionary roots. And he's talking about Darwin. More than a century ago, Darwin offered a revolutionary explanation, sexual selection theory, for the mysteries of mating. And he uses the illustration of peacocks and other things that other animals say, such as large antlers on a deer. Peacocks look like a predator's dream. Not only are peacocks packages of nutritious meat, but they come attached to a long train of brilliant feathers. This train can only encumber a peacock fleeing from predators, and it also serves as a neon sign pointing predators to an easy meal. Darwin's answer was that the peacock's display evolved because they led to their bear's reproductive success by providing an advantage in the competition for desirable peahens. In other words, the display actually attracted more females, is what they're trying to say. Sexual selection, according to Darwin, takes two forms. In one form, same-sex competition, members of the same sex compete with each other. That is, and what I said, that basically is, so is this basically sexual Darwinism. And the outcome of their contest gives the winner greater sexual access to members of the opposite sex. In the other type of sexual selection, members of one sex chose a mate based on their preferences for particular qualities in that mate. The desired characteristics evolve, and that is increasing frequency over time because animals possessing them are chosen more often as mates, and genes that cause them to be desirable get passed down with greater frequency. In other words, the more you get chose, the better odds of your genes surviving into further generations, basically. And so there's the selfish gene and all those other books talking about evolution and evolutionary psychology talk about competition, that nature is all about competition. Darwin's theory of sexual selection began to explain mating behavior by identifying two key processes by which evolutionary change can occur: preferences for a mate and competition for a mate. But the theory was vigorously resisted by male scientists for over a century, in part because the active choosing of mates seemed to grant too much power to females and were thought to remain passive in the mating process. Not a contemporary, but somebody that came right around the time of Darwin, Briefalt, who wrote The Mothers, agreed with Darwin that the primary driver in evolution or sexual selection was the female. And I can't remember Briefalt's law, that section that basically um, women choose their mates or their progenitors for selection because of their own criteria. And if your criteria doesn't meet theirs, then you're not selected. That's basically what you're saying. So culture, consciousness, and free will were presumed to have liberated us from evolutionary forces. The breakthrough in applying sexual selection to human beings came in late 1970s and 1980s in the form of theoretical advances initiated by my colleagues and myself in the fields of psychology and anthropology. They mixed the two. So even in this book, there's a lot of projecting of modern processes and modern cultural adaptations onto evolution or biology. And some of it is, I think some of it is correct. I think a lot of it isn't. Skipping down, strategies or methods for accomplishing goals. The means for solving problems. There you go, Obsidian, and right in your book. Solutions. We'll deal with that in another video. It may seem odd to view human mating, romance, sex, and love as inherently strategic, but humans, like other sexually reproducing species, do not choose mates randomly. We do not attract mates indiscriminately. We do not derogate our competitors out of boredom. Our mating is strategic, and our strategies are designed to solve particular problems in a way that lead to successful mating. Understanding how people solve those problems requires an analysis of sexual strategies. Adaptations are evolved. So, adaptation, here's a definition. Adaptations are evolved solutions to the problems posed by survival and reproduction. And biological adaptations are not really biological, they're actually cultural. I don't think he says that in because if you read it this way, you think that this is bred into the being. And an adaptation is cultural. It's taught. It's imprinted onto the child. Over millions of years, evolution, natural selection has produced in us hunger mechanisms to solve problems of providing nutrients. Taste buds are sensitive to fat and sugar to solve the problem of what to put in our mouths, fruit, meat, nuts, berries, but not dirt or gravel. Sweat glands and shivering mechanisms to solve problems of extreme hot and cold. In other words, for you to adapt to your environment. Emotions such as fear and rage that motivate either fight or combat with predators or com- aggressive competitors and complex immune system to combat diseases and parasites. These adaptations are human solutions to the problems of existence posed by hostile forces of nature. They are our survival strategies. Your body does things, and also you're taught to do things. So solutions or adaptations are survival strategies. And here he says, correspondingly, sexual strategies are adaptive solutions to mating problems. Remember, this is in my mind. He doesn't say it, but adaptations can be biological, but they're also social or cultural. That all of us descend from a long, unbroken line of ancestors who competed successfully for desirable mates, attracted mates who were reproductively valuable, retained mates long enough to reproduce, fended off interested rivals, solved problems that could have impeded reproductive success. We carry with us a sexual legacy of those success stories. Each sexual strategy is tailored to a specific adaptive problem, such as identifying a desirable mate or besting competitors and attracting a mate. See, underlying sexual strategy are psychological adaptations, such as preferences for a particular mate. See, they're psychological, not biological. Our psychological adaptations are also sensitive to information about ourselves, such as our own mate value, or ability to attract mates with a certain level of desirability, such as how much money you make, such as what the person looks like, or male, especially we're going to use men, because what the man looks like, his status in the society, that kind of stuff. Although the term sexual strategies is a useful metaphor for thinking about solutions to mating problems, it is misleading in the sense that it connotes conscious intent. Sexual strategies do not require they don't require it conscious intent, and a lot of it isn't conscious. When you're programmed by the environment or by your society, it a lot of that stuff is unconscious. Our sweat glands are strategies for accomplishing the goal of thermal regulation, but we do not consciously sweat, nor are we aware of our body's target thermal state. Indeed, just as the pianist's sudden awareness of her hands may impede performance, most human sexual strategies are most successful when carried out without the awareness of the actor. That I agree with. In fact, we see it all the time. And in fact, I made a note SMV value, colorism. That is that is all part of it. Said nowhere, selecting a mate, nowhere do people have an equal desire for all possible mates. That is very true. That's where the so-called 80-20 rule comes in. Everywhere some potential mates are preferred and others are shunned. And there's that big middle. I call that the settle region. Our sexual desires have evolved in the same way as many other desires. Our actual food preferences bear out this evolutionary process. We show great fondness for substances rich in fat, sugar, protein, and salt, and an aversion to substances that are bitter, sour, pathogenic, or toxic. These food preferences solve a basic problem of survival. We carry them with us today precisely because they solve critical adaptive problems for our ancestors. Our desires in mate serve analogous adaptive purposes, but their functions do not center simply on survival. Imagine living as our ancestors did long ago, struggling to keep warm by the fire, hunting meat for our kin, gathering nuts and berries, herbs, and avoiding parasites and dangerous animals. If we were to select a mate who failed to deliver the resources promised, who had affairs, who was lazy, who lacked hunting skills, or heaped physical abuse on us, our survival would be tenuous. Now, here I think he's projecting modern values on ancient ancestors. In contrast, a mate who provided abundant resources, protected us and our children, devoted time, energy, and effort to our family would be a great asset. See, here again, we're putting modern values, in my opinion, modern values on biology. Because the nuclear family, as he puts it right now, hasn't been around that long. As a result of power, survival, and reproductive advantages reaped by those who chose mates wisely, clear desires in a mate evolved. As descendants of those successful maters, we carry their desires with us today. I do, yeah. Some of it's taught and some of it's biological. Here's something I agree with that has been taught. Women, like weaver birds, prefer men with desirable nests. Sometimes they do. Consider one of the problems that women in evolutionary history had to face, selecting a man who would be willing to commit to a long-term relationship. See, he's projecting again. A woman in our evolutionary past who chose to commit to a mate with a man who was flighty, impulsive, philandering, or unable to sustain a relationship found herself raising her children alone. That is not true. That is relatively simple in the past because most people, especially before the Industrial Revolution, most groups were a clan. So in a clan, a woman would never be alone. A woman and her children would never be alone. A woman who preferred to mate with a reliable man, one willing to commit to her over the long run, was more likely to have children who survive and thrive. Now that is true to a point. Over thousands of generations, the preference for men who showed signs of being willing and able to commit to to them evolved in women, just as preferences for males with adequate nests evolved in weaver birds. This preferences solved key reproductive problems, just as food preferences solved key survival problems. And this is where I disagree. This is projection. Because if that was the case, then somebody like Pookie and Ray Ray wouldn't have a shot. How can Pookie and Ray Ray have shots? How come bad boys that don't commit are actually sexually preferred by the female? Those two things can't hold at the same time, can they? Then, if that was the case, the so-called betas would be they would prefer the 80%, not the 20%. So this is contradictory because we don't, you don't see that on the white side nor the black side. This stuff about choosing provider males has to be taught, unless you get a baller that has immense wealth, which is monkey branching. Men and women sometimes deliberately pursue short-term sexual strategy, a brief fling, a one-night hookup, a weekend liaison, or casual affair. When they do, their preferences shift. See, the thing is, he just said it, shift dramatically. So it has to be something more than biological, right? The one has to be uh, more than biological. Choosing a provider male over a quote unquote sexual alpha. One of the crucial decisions for humans is selecting a mate is whether they are seeking a short-term mate or a long-term partner. Your biology would not care. That is social programming. Because the thing is, you don't eat bitter food. No, nobody eats bitter food unless you're taught to eat bitter food. Now, everybody has a natural um, instinct to eat fats, salts, and sugars because those are actually rare outside of an industrial society. Those are rare. So basically, now that's biological. That you by taste something sweet, something salty, or something heavy in fat shows you there's calories there. There's something there that's fuel for your body. So that is built into your biology. Now, who's a provider male and who's not? That is social programming. Now, here he's talking about elephant seals, about in other words, the alpha males. Over many generations, male elephant seals who were stronger, larger, more ferocious, and more cunning succeeded in securing mates. The larger, more aggressive males controlled sexual access to females and so passed down to their sons the genes conferring those qualities. Indeed, males now weigh roughly 4,000 pounds, 4 times the weight of females, who appear to human observers to risk getting crushed during copulation. Female elephant seals prefer to mate with the victors and pass down the genes conferring the preference to their daughters. But by choosing the larger, stronger winners, they also determine the genes for size and fighting abilities that will live on in their sons. Smaller and weaker and more timid males fail to mate entirely. In other words, the incels. They become evolutionary dead ends because only 5% of the males monopolize 85% of the females. That's even more extreme than the 80-20 rule. The only difference is between elephant seals and human beings. They say only 20% of males actually have children or actually pass on their genes, which is in the human race that's not true. Even somebody said it might have been David Buss that says 80%. I think it was him. It says 80% of males actually pass on their genes. So people are not like elephant seals in most of these mating behaviors. For example, whereas only okay, in fact he did say it. For example, where only 5% of male elephant seals pass on 85% of the mating, More than 90% of men are able to find a mate at some point in their lives. In other words, human beings use culture to override that. And because human beings are a social animal, a socially cooperative animal, you cannot have you cannot have 5% of the males or 20% of the males take care of 80% of the children. It's not possible. It's not possible to run a society. Your society will die out. If you lose 80% of your males, or your 80% of your males drift off and go do something else, or die, then your society would actually die off because to to raise and nurture the number of children that you would need to actually keep your society going, um, it's not possible for one man to have 5 or 10 wives or that many children because the women aren't capable and the children are too incapacitated because most children cannot live out in the wild by themselves uh, until they reach puberty. So that's 10 or 12 years. So basically that's a 10 or 12 year investment for each child, which is very expensive. So that's why the so-called 80-20 rule, even though that's what women prefer because of physicality, in nature, as far as human beings, it doesn't exist. So really, in a normal society, and this modern society is not normal; it's an outlier. In normal societies, um, there would be very few incels. There'd be very few alpha males, and there'd be very few incels. In other words, um, you might have 10% on the top, or 5 or 10% on the top, and 10%, 5 or 10% at the bottom, probably like 5% at the bottom, and you have like 90%, like he says, in the middle. Skipping down, in our evolutionary past, men who were indifferent to the sexual infidelities of their mates risked compromising their paternity. They risked investing time, energy, and effort in children who were not their own. And we see this come up again. Um, like I said, this again is a modern psychological and a modern cultural purview. Okay, that children were only meant to be there for passing on your genes, which for most societies that is not correct. Children are actually more that, regardless of who the children were, who they were sired by. You want children sired by you, but regardless of who they were, children were valuable because they're labor, and that's the part that we miss. That's the part that David Buss misses. Children were labor. To survive, you need as many hands as you can. So, if you had children, she produced 3, 4 children for you or for the clan. All those children were valuable, and those children helped you survive as you got old. There wasn't merely just you passing on your genes and then that's all you needed from them. No, children are actually more valuable. So it's more than just that. Ancestral women, in contrast, did not risk the loss of parenthood in their mate if their mates had affairs because maternity was always 100% certain. Mama's baby, daddy's maybe. But a woman with a philandering husband risks losing her resources, his commitment, and his investment and her children. Again, this is also a modern um, cultural concept because this is uh, this is more dependent on a nuclear family. Children are actually wealth. The emotion of jealousy motivates multiple actions in response to the threat of the relationship. Sexual jealousy, for example, may produce either of two radically different tactics, vigilance or violence. That's very true, especially as you go up to further up the ladder. I think we're going to end it here. They're talking about jealousy, and I think he's written another book on jealousy. And they said these are vigilance and jealousy, basically jealousy, vigilance, and violence, the two V's, are retention factors. Jealousy is not a rigid invariant instinct that drives robot-like mechanical action. It is highly sensitive to context and environment. In other words, adaptation and cultural, including formability of the rival, differences in mate value between the two partners, the alternative mating options available to the garter, the many other behavioral options available to serve. The strategy of jealousy gives humans a flexibility in tailoring their responses to the nuances of a situation's culture. This book documents a wide range of actions that are triggered by jealousy in the context in which they occur. Now, reading Bus, anybody that reads Bus uh, would know right off the bat, hopefully right off the bat, what he says is that a lot of this stuff is unconscious. A lot of this stuff is through feelings. Unconscious works through feelings, and women are the biggest feelers, right? So their decisions of who to mate with is not always conscious. That's why ancient societies and even most societies in the world have arranged marriages, because human beings do not run on instinct. Instinct informs their choices, but it doesn't run them. So, of course, women are going to prefer jawline niggas, or they're going to prefer cads over dads. And not every dude is a cad. And a jawline nigga that's a dad is going to get preferred over a cad that's not. And the vast majority of people pick or imprinted on their society about what looks good. What is a preference? What is a preference of a mate? What he should look like, how tall he should be. All that stuff is actually informed by the society. Now, the society works with the biology, but it can also override it, also modify it to the point where we're just strictly going on like Buster is by biology. Then a lot of what we say is about who women should choose as far as having a mate, long term or short term, is not informed by their biology and by their logic. Informed by their biology. If the society's culture does not override it, most time society's culture will override it. But I don't think, but this book, as far as Bust is concerned, is not differentiating between culture that's informing or actually informing these decisions and in context with the biology. I think he does. No, it's a fun read, but I think he does a poor job of explaining the differences, which is a problem I have with this particular book. Which a lot of stuff I have problems with what Obsidian says about dating and mating, because your post-industrial environment changes way faster than biology does. So the type of dude that a black woman would have wanted on the plains of the Serengeti, 5, 6, 700 years ago, is going to be pretty much the same today with modifications because of culture. But you can't have it both ways. You It can't be biological. It can't be just biological for cultural decision. What determines the dad? What determines the cat? If biologically they are black women or women of any stripe just chose the dad and rejected the cat, then it will be biological, but they don't. It's the social pressure and social reasoning and social teaching that makes her override the desire to be with that cat. Because long term mating is a logical idea. Short term sex is biologically driven, but long term mating is a sociological, cultural idea. And so, how you could read this book and not even come up to that conclusion baffles me. But anyway, I'm not going to do an hour. I'm just going to try to hold these down to 30 minutes. But there will be more to come. This is part one. And we're going to pick it up on page 16 with replacing a mate.